My friends, good day. At the beginning of this month, on November 4th, a McDonnell Douglas 11 aircraft, a Trijet, you can see the model here, belonging to the United Parcel Service Company, crashed during takeoff from Louisville Airport. It was taking off from runway 17R, and then we all saw the footage. During takeoff, there was a fireball near the left wing. The aircraft had trouble gaining altitude, and afterwards it came back down to the ground and crashed. It's a tragedy that killed 14 people, 3 in the plane, the co-pilot, the captain, and another extremely experienced co-pilot, all 3 and 11 people on the ground, plus some injured. So, since then, several things have happened. First, the Argentine Football Association has banned all McDonnell Douglas, 11S, the remaining McDonnell Douglas 11S. I want to say they're all used for cargo. Today, there isn't any airline that uses this kind of aircraft for passenger transport, so the companies that use this plane had to put it away. It's literally grounded. In fact, it happened so suddenly that, for example, there was a United Parcel Service plane, a McDonnell Douglas 11, that was taxiing to take off. It was packed with flights and everything. The guys get to the runway entrance, and then they receive a message telling them to turn around and come back immediately. The plane can't fly, so that's where we are. FedEx uses the McDonnell Douglas 11 internationally. United Parcel Service only uses it for local destinations in the United States. By the way, when you look, it was going from Kentucky, the United Parcel Service hub, to Hawaii, but still within the United States. At FedEx, for example, they use it internationally. I saw a picture earlier of a FedEx McDonnell Douglas 11. It looks like it's stuck in Japan. So do they have other McDonnell Douglas 11S stuck all over the world? Is it going to fly again or not? We don't know at this point, but it might be the end for that aircraft. Because anyway, even before this accident, it was already heading toward the end. Anyway, it didn't have many years of service left. Except that now, with this shutdown, yes, now millions have to be spent to get them flying again, to restore the safety of these planes and put them back in service. Is it worth it? A decision must be made, but sometimes it's not. If the plane only has 3, 4, or 5 years of expected life left, you're not going to spend millions to bring it up to standards so it can fly again. Maybe you think it's time to get rid of it. An interim report was issued by the National Transportation Safety Board. It's a progress report, as they say. At this point, there's no analysis or explanation. It's simply the first elements of this investigation that are given like that, in bulk. So we know today that during the acceleration, it happened completely normally. It's an aircraft that accelerated along runway 17R completely normally, up until the moment of rotation, the moment when it lifts its nose. At the moment it lifts its nose, the wheels leave the ground. And then the left engine comes off. So engine number 1 tears away. So it tears off. A key detail is that it detaches with its pylon, which is actually the opposite of what you might think. It's not the engine itself that tore off, it's actually the engine's pylon that tore off from the wing. So the engine left with the pylon. You can see it rising almost vertically, so it flips over the wing. It goes up almost vertically because it still has a bit of residual thrust. It's on fire, that's fuel. And then it goes above the height of the vertical stabilizer, the vertical fin, and actually it falls back down afterwards. The plane reaches about 10 meters or 30 feet according to the National Transportation Safety Board. It reaches the end of the runway. There's a barrier that it's going to fly over, but it won't be able to climb much higher. A few questions why, mainly why. This engine tore off during takeoff. We remember, for those who saw the video about 2 years ago, we remember. American Airlines, 191, it was a DC-10. The McDonnell Douglas 11 comes from the DC-10. It's a stretched version. It's a modernized version of the DC-10. It has a lot of the same technical choices. So there's a DC-10 at the end of the 70s. It was American Airlines Flight 191. It was in Chicago. During takeoff, at the moment of rotation, engine number 1 tore off in exactly the same way. It flipped over the wing. And then what did the aircraft do? The aircraft stalled. It did. There was maybe a small detail I mentioned last time, is that the slats, the leading edge slats, retracted. And then there were also the pilots who followed the procedure, and that's what actually killed them. because when the engine fell off, there was no fire on American Airlines 191. The engine just fell off. Yes, it damaged the wing, but at that point they had enough speed to keep climbing safely. They had the option to climb, to go, turn around, dump fuel, come back and land. But the reality is that when they lost the engine, since they couldn't see it, since they didn't have a visual on it, from the cockpit, they thought it was an engine failure. So what did they do? They started to slow down to V2 speed, and actually, V2 speed was 6 knots below stall speed with the slats retracted. Whereas, if they had kept their current speed and continued climbing, the plane wouldn't have stalled. But they would have needed to know, Henri, they didn't know, they would have needed to know the extent of the damage. They would have needed to know that the slats were retracted. They would have needed to know the engine was gone. But you can't blame them for following the procedure that was published at the time, for following their training. But the fact is that in theory, this crash of American Airlines 191 was not absolutely necessary. It wasn't mathematically necessary, it was avoidable. Except when you add the layer of procedure on top of it, there you go. It caused a disaster with, if I recall, 271 deaths. It's the most serious plane crash in United States history so far. I was saying that during American Airlines 191, the engine came off during rotation. On the PS plane, the same thing happened at the moment of rotation. The engine tore off. Why exactly at that moment? Actually, it's very likely that it's an effect of torque or gyroscopic force. Why? Let me tell you. Maybe I'll show you a fan like this. So here we have a fan. I won't turn it on because then the microphones will pick up only that. Actually, imagine it spinning and I suddenly tilt it upward. This is a plastic fan, but imagine it's made of metal. It's really heavy and it's spinning very fast. Well, it has a gyroscopic moment, there's resistance, and when I tilt it upward, it will tend to move sideways. By following at 90 degrees in the direction of rotation, you get the same effect if you take a bicycle wheel, hold it by the axle, spin it as fast as you can, and then try to tilt it. Change the axle's direction and you'll see there is a tendency, strong resistance, and resulting lateral forces. So that's a gyroscopic effect. The strongest gyroscopic effect in the engines happens at takeoff. Why? Because the engines are at full power or almost at full power. And then the plane lifts off. And you don't have, it lifts off at about 15 to 18 degrees depending on the aircraft, but it lifts off pretty quickly by about 15 degrees. You don't have anything equivalent to that moment during the rest of the flight, because even during landing, when it lifts its nose, for example, that's a nose-up movement that happens. But the engines, no. The engines are relatively slowed down at that stage. They're not at full power like during takeoff. So there's this moment that creates this gyroscopic effect, which means that if an engine has weakened or damaged mounts, that's when the risk of it coming off is at its highest. So we have another aircraft that did that. So now a story I wanted to tell you is that this is an extremely old aircraft. The plane that crashed from the PS, well, it had 93,000 flight hours. That's huge. 93,000 flight hours and 21,000 cycles. The pylon attachments to the wing were supposed to be thoroughly inspected between 28,000 and 29,000 cycles. If we do a rule of 3, we see that it's a way of saying that they should have been inspected, or they should have been inspected. In the future, roughly 140,000 flight hours, and the plane will probably be 50 years old. A way of saying that they were designed to never be inspected, because quite simply, airliners never reached that number of flight hours and that number of cycles. They are taken out of service for other reasons long before they reach those theoretical values. So, in reality, if you want, McDonnell Douglas had designed these fittings so that they would never be thoroughly inspected. Yes, regular visual inspections occurred, including one in October, as noted in the interim report. But the fact is, the really thorough inspection was just purely theoretical. What happened? And here we have some extremely interesting images in this report. It's that the reactor, or rather the pylon to which the reactor is attached, broke. It broke a retaining ring, you see. And then from there, the rest followed in a chain reaction. So just to show you something, how the reactors are attached. You have the pylon, which actually attaches at 2 points. That means first the reactor is attached to the pylon, but then the pylon itself attaches at 2 points. There's a spot at the back and a spot at the front. It's not much, it's just 2 places that allow the reactor to be suspended. And there is on Airbus and on Boeing as well, but it's extremely small. There are thrust rods. They're rods that transmit the thrust, because actually it works like this. You have the engine that's suspended, so it's attached to the wing. That suspension is for the weight of the engine. It's going to support the weight of the thing, if you will. On the other hand, an engine pushes forward most of the time, and it pushes backward during thrust reversal. And so here, there are connecting rods. There are rods that can be either 2 separate rods, or it can be a V-shaped rod, like on the Boeing 787. I'll show you the mechanism. And actually, these connecting rods are able to work when they're stretched, which is most of the time, or work in compression during thrust reversal. These connecting rods will attach toward the engine fan. It's the fan, the blower, that provides most of the thrust. So that's where we're going to find an attachment point, right at the level of the blower. And we're going to bring the bar up to the level of the wing, to the wing structure, to make sure it's secure. This bar will actually handle the axial part of the force, so the thrust from the engine will be transmitted through this bar. So actually, each one will do a different job. The system that highlighted D11 comes from the DC-10, and it was already quite criticized back in the days of American Airlines. If you look at the accident report, page 22, the accident report of American Airlines 191, you will see that they describe a problem related to the assembly. That means when you look here, we have the wing. So this in black is the wing, and we have this black part here that allows to support the pylon, you see? So the pylon, it has an axis here and there's a ball joint. Here at this level, there's a ball joint. Why is there a ball joint? The engine, just to give you a 3D view, the engine is like this, okay? The fan is like this. This is the fan. And then we have the pylon that goes up like this and attaches here, okay? And the diagram on the board, in the diagram, we have this green part that belongs to the pylon and the black part that belongs to the wing structure. And between the two, there's this ball joint assembly. So the ball joint assembly is what allows the engine to move a little bit. You know, when you're on a plane from the island and you look out the window or through the porthole, when there's turbulence, what do you see? You see the engine doing a dance like this. You see it vibrating a little bit. And actually, it's not welded to the wing. It's not held by weld points. It's not really bolted to the wing. It's mounted on a ball joint to allow for some flexibility that lets it move both right and left. And that's a small rotation right at the wing pylon connection. So what they discovered back during American Airlines 191 was that this happened on a lot of planes. It's that since the assembly here doesn't have an extremely clear specification or extremely clear tolerance, by McDonnell Douglas, what was happening was that the distance here could sometimes decrease to the point that it could go further. When they checked on various planes, they found that it could range from 0.13 millimeters, so a tenth of a millimeter, up to 1.14 millimeters. So it could be between a tenth of a millimeter to more than 1 millimeter. It's still not very precise, you see. With this kind of engineering, it's not precise at all. So in cases, look at what happens in cases where the distance is extremely small. These two parts, the green one and the black one, which are normally supposed to be able to move relative to each other along the axis, the ball joint, well, they can come into contact. We can have unwanted contact. So unwanted contact is, for example, imagine the rotation here. This one turns like this, and you can imagine, for example, that this end comes into contact. Right, okay? At that moment, we no longer have the possibility, we no longer have that flexibility, you see, of rotation. of slight lateral rotation. So what's going to happen? There's a huge force, there's a huge pressure effort here, which will be transmitted along these branches and which could potentially break them. In fact, at the time both branches broke, they had been weakened. By this, but also by the way, American Airlines at the time had used a hydraulic jack, well, a hydraulic forklift to replace the engine. This, of course, badly damaged the mounts that were just waiting to break off. By the way, the year before, I think this crash happened in 79. In 78, there was a similar accident at Continental. So it didn't go as far as a crash. At one point, while they were installing the engine, they broke the attachments. Normally, it should have been reported to the Argentine Football Association because that's damage to the structure of an aircraft. But what did they do? They just repaired it there, they replaced a number of parts and all that, and then they covered it up. And the Australian Transport Safety Bureau blamed them for that in the report on the American Airlines 191 accident. So, what we have today is that we have this United Parcel Service aircraft that somehow inherited the problems of the DC-10 and then brought them back to our time. And today, here we are facing exactly the same accident as in 1979. American Airlines 191, which is actually mentioned in the interim accident report and will probably be mentioned in the final report as well. Well, that accident has come back to haunt us in our time. Engine loss, but this time instead of, because back then when there was the engine loss on American Airlines, we decided to do this. We said to ourselves, what we're going to do is make sure that if an engine breaks off and hits the slats, well, they won't retract. That's what they did. So they changed the configuration of the slats so that if one is broken and there's a hydraulic loss and all that, these won't retract on their own on one half of the wing while they're extended on the other, and then cause that asymmetric stall. It was replaced. On the other hand, the real problem is the mounting of the engine on the wing or the mounting of the pylon on the wing. Well, it wasn't changed. It wasn't deeply modified. So today it breaks again. So the slats didn't retract. That's true, but that's just the report. We're not discussing it yet. What we must have had is engine damage. Probably this one tore off. There's fire. There are metal pieces flying everywhere. Probably that engine must have swallowed some, maybe this one too. And now we have a plane that's lacking power. That's why it couldn't climb, and so the aircraft can't gain altitude. And what's it going to do? It will come back down and cause the damage I mentioned earlier. That's it. So that was the progress report on the MD-11 accident of the PS. Thank you for supporting this channel. Thanks to those who do so on Patreon. Honestly, without them, this channel couldn't exist. In return, they get access to exclusive videos, just like those who also subscribe to this channel. By the way, subscribe. It's a way to show me that you like aldosterone, aviation. I never asked for subscriptions, but just to give you an example, this channel got 400 subscribers in the last 30 days. That means, at this rate, I'm at 144,000 subscribers. To reach 150,000, I'll probably have to wait until early 2027. All right? So I just want to tell you, please click and subscribe. That's the least you can do to show me you appreciate my work. I'll see you in the next video and see you very soon.